Justice Tech Pros here. Today's episode, I'm going to be focusing on one topic, which was actually a listener request. They wanted to just talk about cameras in the courtroom and how, they feel, which I agree with, cameras should be in the courtroom. But for purposes of actually recording the proceedings and not related to the whole media aspect. So I'm going to dive into that. But before I discuss that a bit, I wanted to bring up I was recently interviewed by an online website blog. I'm going to put the link. The link will be in the details of this video. And it was actually a good interview. I mean, I thank the individual who runs the website and the interviewer. They were fair. They allowed me to expand on my answers. And, they pretty much just asked me questions I was comfortable with, which I thought could help in a lot of ways. It could help shed light on certain things that go on. It could also just enhance people's perspective of what the podcast is about and its genesis. And I was just pleased with how it came out, and I just want to thank them for that. I appreciate the fairness of it. I appreciate the opportunity to not be limited in what I wanted to explain. So again, the link is in the description, so check it out if you haven't read it yet. I think it'll be eye-opening, and I think it'll be appreciated by some. I say appreciated by some because, as always, just as is life, you're going to have opponents of my thought process and opponents who think what I'm saying, is biased and one-sided because I'm trying to stick up for certain people or I'm trying to stick up for what I believe in. And there's a certain truth to that. Of course, there's always going to be a bias if you're defending somebody. But there's a big difference when you're laying out facts to support your claims. It's not just passion and emotion that I'm speaking from. I'm speaking from examples and factual events that took place. So I find it very predictable when I do come across opponents. They have the predictable response, especially I'm sure in a lot of these online blog rooms or anything that any source that gets wind of the interview, they'll look to, I'm sure, knock it and try to say that things are fair, and if you have a label, you deserved to be treated a certain way. And the funny part is they don't comprehend. I'm not appealing to minds like that. Those are closed-minded people who, that's the problem right there in a nutshell. What I try to appeal to is on this show is, I'm not delusional. I know when people come from a certain background and they have a certain mindset and they're very closed-minded, you're not going to change that. And they're honestly better off just passing by this, my podcast, because it's not for them. They need to go to a podcast that just speaks everything that they want to hear and nothing that gives them thought to reflect or to try to look at something from another perspective. This isn't the show. What I try to do is appeal more to those who are open-minded and maybe those who are unaware of things that are going on, and those that can put their personal feelings aside just to try to focus on justice and making sure in our legal system everybody should receive a fair trial and a fair experience if they are unfortunately faced with it. Those who oppose that, that's all well and good, but guess what? You're predictable, number one, and number two, you're the majority. So it's not as if you're making a stand and saying something that's groundbreaking. You're really not. You're actually just going with the majority of the crowd and the majority of the public, and that's why we have verdicts the way we have them. So I know you think you'll get on your soapbox and you'll talk passionately and you'll try to, knock down certain things and say this is biased, and if they have a label of organized crime or they're defending organized crime or they work in the defense of, or they deserve what they get. You're a very predictable individual, and that's really the mindset. There's no changing that, but that's the problem. And what's funny is if you're in the dark that you don't think you are the problem by thinking that way, that's what's even more telling. And that's it, in of itself. that's pretty much the situation that people are faced with when they go up against an unfair trial. People with that mindset are on the jury, and that's why things go the way they go. And my hopes is to appeal to those that are open-minded, as I said, those who are maybe looking at things from a different perspective but can respect another point of view on it and are intelligent enough to understand you put feelings aside when you're judging certain things, particularly when you're making a judgment on somebody's life and facts affecting if they are accused of a crime. You want to go by the facts. I mean, that's what the law is. It's about facts and evidence. If you're going to go by your stereotypes, then there's nothing I could say or anybody else could say. That's just your mindset. And like I said, I just find it amusing when they think they're making a stand or they're saying something creative when they act that way, and they act, when they look to bash something that is different of their beliefs. I find it amusing that they think this is some kind of groundbreaking way to conduct themselves. No, that's the norm. You're very predictable. And that's how the majority of the public is. And that's, the way it is. So I'm not on here to really get into that side of the public where they're just so close-minded. Nothing you say, nothing you show is going to make a difference. And it's like I said in past podcasts, that's really the mindset. It's, when you're trying to explain something to somebody that's factual and black and white, and they don't want to see it only because they're blinding themselves with their own hidden agendas and their own personal views. They're just intentionally blinding their thought process from analyzing the information in front of them. They're rather reverting back to how they personally feel on the topic to make their decision. Then that's just how they operate. There's nothing you can do about that. So again, when you get a chance, click on the link. I think you'll enjoy it. It was a great write-up. And I do appreciate the way it was conducted and the way I was treated. And I thank both individuals involved for that. So on to today, as I mentioned earlier, was a listener wanted to talk a bit about cameras in the courtroom. And I thought it was a great suggestion because just initially, without even researching a little bit, which I did, right away it just struck out to me how much that would prevent. If you had a camera in the courtroom, it would probably make appeals 100 times stronger, and it would probably make behavior much more fair and much more proceeding in the way of obtaining justice, because if somebody's on camera, they're going to be very conscious of certain things. They're not going to lose their temper as quickly. They're not going to rule maybe so blatantly unfairly. It's almost like a checks and balances within the courtroom, where you're having a recording device oversee the proceedings. And I think that would be powerful. When I was reading, I started diving into some of the research of it and the history of it, and it seems like the whole camera in the courtroom thing really became that's where the ban of cameras got spurred, was from the Lindbergh baby kidnapping, that trial back in 1935 is when that's when the cameras in the courtroom were significantly challenged. And the reason was during the Lindbergh baby kidnapping trial, this was way before my time, but there was chaos apparently from the media. I mean, people crawling all over people, trying to take pictures, and it was very distracting. And I could totally see that. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm not talking about cameras for media purposes. And I believe the listener was also on the same line of thinking as I am. We're talking more of cameras in the courtroom to oversee the proceedings. And when you think about that, there's really no negative side to that. If it's an internal thing that only the defense could access, the prosecutor could access, and the courts could access, there's no downside to it. Because it's recorded, there's no violation of privacy. It's just recording the proceedings that are in the courtroom, which is already witnessed by those in the courtroom. And you only allow, as I said, the court, the prosecutor, the government, and the defense access to the proceedings so they could review it. And it's such a simple concept that you would figure is a no-brainer, and then you start to question, why is that? And I'm not a big, I try to stay away from sounding like a conspiracy, type individual, where I'm always thinking there's some kind of conspiracy going on. But forget about conspiracy. Just look at the facts on that. Why would there be opposition to cameras in the courtroom that have nothing to do with the media? It's an internal thing that can only be accessed by the defense of the prosecutor or the government, and it's just part of the justice system and how it plays out. There really should be no objection to that because it protects everybody. It protects the prosecutor from anything the defense may be doing that would not be picked up on without a camera. It protects the defense. And it will also be a tremendous tool for appeals. I mean, I just think how powerful that would be if you submit let's just say you're submitting part of your appeal argument was prosecutorial misconduct. Maybe they did a few things in the courtroom, said some things they shouldn't have said, reacted in ways they shouldn't have reacted that was influencing the jury. And now you have a visual representation you could hand over attached to your appeal. That would be incredibly powerful, to be able to see it play out as they're reading it in the appeal. I think that would do a tremendous amount of good. And it would keep a lot of people honest. As I touched on earlier, when there's a camera recording your every move and you're in a professional environment and you're in a serious environment like that, you're going to be very fine-tuned to your actions. You're going to be very aware of how you're conducting yourself. And it will keep people honest. It'll keep, I personally think it could only help both sides. And being on the defense, I'd want it to help our side, obviously. And I think that could only help the situation. I think it would prevent a lot of what plays out from playing out. I mean, if, let's just say you're getting unfair rulings time and again, and the judge is offering rulings and issuing rulings that just constantly go against the defense. Who knows? Maybe knowing there's a camera in there, those things would be second-guessed. Maybe if you know that you're under that type of scrutiny and it's being videotaped. So now, in addition to the minutes, you have the actual videotape, which, when you read something, sometimes it can't portray what actually took place because there's a lot of other visual aspects of an experience that can't be explained in the written word. Somebody may make gestures, somebody may use a sarcastic remark which doesn't play off that way when you read it, but yet that's how it was intended. I mean, there's a lot of ways, as we know, between just human behavior. If you're seeing it visually, it could have a completely different impact and level of acceptance or level of taking it in than if you're just reading it off a piece of paper. So I think a lot of that would limit, if there was cameras in the courtroom, it would obviously limit a lot of that from taking place. And it makes you think, why would they be so against it? And I saw, the more I read, it seems like they just keep using the media as the excuse of why there's no cameras in the courtroom. But again, that's kind of playing with words. What I would want, and I believe what everybody would want, it has nothing to do with the media and with the press. What I'm talking about is an internal thing that's just part of the court proceedings. So the media excuse wouldn't even play into it where they're saying it's a distraction, because I do agree with that. It would be a distraction, and a lot of defendants wouldn't want that getting out in the media. They wouldn't want their business broadcast. That's not what it should be used for. This should just be an internal process and an internal way in which the trial operates. In other words, from the day you get indicted, every proceeding is recorded. And I just think that would be a phenomenal tool if you could go back as the defense team and really review these things play out. Review what happened in the courtroom. I'm sure it would increase the powers of motions. Imagine being able to submit a video clip along with your motion for the judge to view. And it may be a good tool even for the judge, where if he or she unintentionally is, say, doing certain things or making certain rulings, but if they have the video camera, it may wake them up a little bit. And again, put them on notice. Just keep them a little bit more sharp for the proceedings, and to try to remind them also to be fair, because a judge is human. That's just how it goes. A judge is human, and maybe sometimes it should never happen, but sometimes it does happen, which is the reality. Personal views and opinions leak into the rulings and leak into what's allowed for the defense and what's not. And maybe a camera would prevent a lot of that. And honestly, I don't even think it's a maybe, in my opinion, the way I see it. Personally, I think it would prevent 99.9% of it. The only things it wouldn't prevent is if somebody gets if their temper kicks in so strongly that they just react, not caring whether they're on camera or not. But I think the majority of it, it's going to allow for a much more fair trial and a much more fair proceedings than are currently in play. And again, I can't relate to the other side of that, because the only argument I've seen has to do with the media, and the way I just laid it out, the media wouldn't even be involved. This isn't something for the media. This is just a tool for the defense, for the prosecution, for the government, and for the courts just to have and to use. It's just it's almost like another process, another tool of the justice system, where you have the motions as a tool. Now you have video recordings of the proceedings as another tool. And it really makes you question, why is there so much pushback from it? Why is the government so anti-cameras on the federal level, especially? Some state courts, especially civil, I was reading, are a little more liberal with that, and they've even done an experiment, where they had an experiment back in 2011, where they had a certain number of state civil courtrooms, almost like a test. They allowed the proceedings to be videotaped. But I think on the federal level, it's not really an option. There has been motions where people would want it to go live for the media, but again, that's not what I'm talking about. So I would want on the federal level, it really makes you think why they would be against that. There's really no rhyme or reason. I know if I'm a lawyer, let's say, and I'm defending a case, I would have no reason not to want the camera in. I'm not worried about me doing anything that's unethical or against process. I'm going to go and do my job. And whatever I'm allowed to do by law to defend my client, that's what I'm going to do. So I don't care if it's videotaped or not videotaped. It really doesn't matter to me. And that's what everybody should think. Everybody who has a part in that courtroom, whether it's the judge, whether it's the prosecutor, U.S. attorney, whoever it may be, everybody should have the same idea in their head that it doesn't matter whether or not it's filmed or not, because they're just going there to do their job. It's those who maybe are not going there to do their job and are looking to do things that may be questionable, who are pushing back so hard against it. Maybe that's the problem right there in of itself. And there was a petition started for the cameras in the courtroom. And I'm also going to put that link on my in the details of this video. So if you agree with it, just give it a shot. Sign it. I don't know, it can't hurt, put it that way. It's only something that could help. And again, it's not for the media. It's nothing like that. This is something that could just protect the defendant. And I don't see the downside of it. On either side of the coin, I don't see the downside of it. Another thing I wanted to touch on a little bit as well was a couple times in court, I would see, they would try to paint the defendant. They used like these terms where they would talk about different defendants, and whether it was the judge or the prosecutor, they would try to act as if whether they have two sides to them. It's very common where they have two sides, almost trying to make it like they have two personalities, like a good one and a bad one. And to me, that's such a hypocritical statement, because think about, in general, everybody, whether it's the judge, the prosecutor, whoever it is, the people serving on the jury, the people in the audience, if you want to put it in those terms, wouldn't you say everybody has different sides to them? it's a hypocritical statement because, in other words, I know me, for example. I may act one way with my friends where I'm more comfortable, another way when I'm at a business meeting, another way when I'm dealing with a new client, another way when I'm dealing with a client I'm comfortable with. I'm sure my children would tell you I'm a different person at home. I obviously are not going to act with my family as I do with, say, strangers or a professional. Every situation you're put in, human nature, you're going to act accordingly, unless you have something wrong with you where you're just going to act the same way, or whether the situation calls for it or not. You can't read a room. And, but what I'm talking about is, I don't know how they try to paint it as if this Jekyll and Hyde thing. See, that's how they try to paint it. And they try to switch it that way and make it that the defendant's more of a Jekyll and Hyde, where it's a sinister attribute for somebody to have, or a sinister characteristic. And when you hear it, you could tell that's what they're hinting at. But if you think about it, I just think to myself, does the judge act the same way in the courtroom that he or she does in their house, as they do with their husband, as they do with their kids? Of course not. Everybody acts different. So I don't even know what the point is of that. I know they're trying, I should rephrase that. I know what the point is of that. They're trying to paint the defendant as some type of dual personality, evil individual. That's what they're trying to do. And again, if somebody's not breaking down what they're saying, they're going to buy into that. And people should be a little more realistic with themselves when they're hearing these crazy things thrown around in the courtroom. They should really break it down and ask themselves who doesn't have different sides of them. It's not about being a Jekyll and Hyde. It's about reading the room. It's about changing for the environment, conducting yourself properly in different environments. It's if you go to a bar, you act one way. Let's just say maybe you're a little more loose, you're hanging out, you're a little more comfortable. You go to a high-end restaurant, you're not going to be yelling as if you're in a loud, crowded bar. Different environments cause for different ways of behavior. And that's not a negative thing to have. That's a good trait to have. I think that shows intelligence, where you have somebody who could adapt and they don't act the same way in every type of environment. You're going to a funeral, you're going to be, if you're normally an upbeat person who's always laughing and telling jokes, are you going to go into a funeral and start telling jokes? I think everybody will look at you with, not too happily if they see that. And that's my point. You see these mundane points that are made, that they go over a lot of people's heads, but when they make them, they try to take the defendant and twist their actions. They try to make them, this guy's a Jekyll and Hyde. And, that's why, because, and they use that, I notice, when a lot of times individuals will go for sentencing, and the families and people who care about them will write letters. And to almost wash themselves of having to hear what a good person this individual may be that is sitting in front of them. They don't want to hear that. So the way that they make it right in their head, they tell themselves, I'm dealing with a Jekyll and Hyde. He's fooling everybody. He's one way with one people, but he's really not this good person that these dozens of letters say. And that's not what they want to hear. And again, that's not true. That's not true. Just because somebody may be accused of a crime, you want to then make it that they have no redeeming qualities, nothing about them that speaks what kind of a human they are, what kind of an individual, what kind of, what people they may have helped, people who care about them. It's just a twisted way, I noticed, and the way it was used was really disturbing in what I witnessed. It had a lot. It always came into play, I noticed, when letters were read, from families and from friends and loved ones of the defendant. They would just pretty much dismiss those letters by just saying, they're dismissing everybody's feelings and everybody who put the effort in to write that letter, and everybody who thought that the letter would be read with a fair eye and an unbiased eye and with an open mind, and then that letter gets pretty much trashed and gets dismissed as if it's just nonsense because the defendant is a Jekyll and Hyde, and those letters mean nothing because they're talking about this other personality, this imaginary personality that they're making up. And that's what really gets disturbing, when you see the families get affected by that, and they see that their words have no impact. And it's almost as if their words get used against them, because they try to make it as if those letters are just a last attempt to try to, again, fool somebody. When it's not. These are heartfelt emotions. People are trying to help their loved one in any way they can because, unfortunately, you're usually helpless. There's not much you could do. So they feel if they have one contributing part, which is to put a pen to paper and write down some words about a person they may care about, and then to have it dismissed as if it meant nothing, that's not right. And I think a lot of it, you get these people, a lot of the time, some people, I should say, sometimes judges or prosecutors, they make these things personal when they really shouldn't be personal. I mean, even for a prosecutor, or you figure they're just doing their job, it's their case, just do your job. When they get so personal with things, it really makes you question what's going on. And there's no talk about checks and balances. There's no checks and balances for that. If someone's not taking things personally, they'll go by the law and they'll go by what's right and what's wrong. When they're taking it personally, all that goes out the window. They just have their eye on the prize. And it all goes into, all these things, each episode that I try to do, they all, if you notice, they all kind of run into one another. And it's almost as, a common theme. And I think that's why when, like the camera came up, I thought it fit in so perfectly. I thought it was a great idea because it just fits into the whole concept of just trying to keep things in a more fair manner. And they're not playing out that way right now. And I know a lot of people don't want to hear that because they haven't experienced it. And they're not going to hear it. If you get a closed-minded person, they're not going to hear it. The only time people are going to hear it is when you're dealing with an intelligent, reasonable person. And whether they like somebody or not, that's irrelevant. If you're just going by the facts, and if you read the law and you understand the law, and then you're seeing it play out, and it's not playing out the way it's written, that would tell any reasonable person something's wrong. The only people who would feel there's nothing wrong with that are those who are unreasonable and those who have an agenda and those who make things personally. It's like anything else. It's almost like rules of a sporting event. If there's certain rules that need to take place for that sporting event, and little by little the rules start changing, are you really even playing the same game anymore? If you start changing the rules, not going by the rules, inventing things, are you even playing the same game? And the answer is you're not. That's why there are rules put into play. That's why there are systems to be followed and to be executed in the manner in which they're supposed to be carried out. And that's the reasoning, to have structure and to have things laid out. I mean, there's endless guidelines, regulations, statutes. If they're all followed, then at least things are going in the right direction. And you're on the path to get a fair trial. It's when things are changed up, that's when the whole system gets out of whack. And when tools are used in ways they're not supposed to be used. And, it all goes back to accountability. And I did an episode on accountability where, unfortunately, even if things are done intentionally on the side of being unfair, there's no repercussions for that. So when you think about it, what gauge does somebody have? If somebody is not fair and somebody's not looking to do things as they're supposed to be done in the eyes of the law, there's really nothing to keep them on track or on path for that because there's no price to pay. And the scary part is if things go south, the defendant has a horrible negative result, and now they have to go through the system once again to try to appeal and to try to get justice at another level. And when you see things playing out, if you're involved in the trial and you're going through trial and you see things are playing out poorly and you're not getting the rulings you should be getting and things just aren't falling into play the way they should be, it's extremely concerning because there's really nothing you could do. It just has to play out, and then you have to hope for your second shot, which would be at the appeal level. But that in of itself is a problem. I mean, to have to endure that in the first place You would want it to be fair from inception. That's really all I got for this episode. I would just want the listeners to think about the whole camera in the courtroom situation and to really debate internally for themselves how there is no downside to that, especially as I explained where it would only be used as part of the judicial process and to ensure that everyone's getting a fair trial, and then if need be, used for motions, used for appeal. I just don't see the downside of that. And if there was an aspect where, say, they would want certain ones to be public, that could be a case-by-case basis. But if the process is just automatically where cameras are allowed in the courtroom, and then the whole media aspect of it could be weighed individually, could be gauged based on motions. If the defense team does want certain things broadcasted, that could be a whole different argument. But I think the initial concept of just having them in the courtroom for legal proceedings and for a legal tool on both sides is only beneficial. So again, I'm putting 2 links in the details of the podcast. One is for the article, which I think you'll enjoy it, and the other one is for the petition about the cameras in the courtroom. So just have a look, and if you agree with it, I'd appreciate it if you sign the petition. And feel free to drop me an email. Let me know what you thought about the interview and about any of the episodes. And again, any show ideas, just email my company. It's info@justicetechpros.com, and just put podcast in the subject, and they'll forward it to me, and I'll check it out. Thank you for tuning in. Have a good night.